Welcome back. A recent study released in May from the Brennan Center for Justice names North Carolina as one of a handful of states that they say skews the makeup of the U.S. House of Representatives. That is, the congressional districts are so gerrymandered in North Carolina and other states that their congressional delegations favor one party over another. The study also says that states with districts drawn by split-party state governments, commissions, or courts have significantly less partisan bias. This comes as North Carolina has to redraw its congressional districts last year, set to redraw its legislative districts likely this year. Joining us for more on this, Michael Lee, Senior Counsel with the Brennan Center and a co-author of the study. He's joining us from our sister station, New York One in the Big Apple, and Francis DeLuca, Director of the Conservative Civitas Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mr. Lee, let's start with you. So you believe that the gerrymandering, as it's called, is so bad that Democrats could actually win Congress back?
Well, what the study shows is that there's high partisan bias in a handful of states, which is good news in some sense. The sort of extreme gerrymandering isn't everywhere, but there are a handful of states, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, where there was really aggressive gerrymandering this decade, and that in part is contributing to a significant number of seats that Republicans hold that they probably wouldn't hold otherwise, and that could affect the control of Congress.
So we talked to one of the authors of the maps, Bob Ruccio. He argues that the congressional districts aren't majority GOP. They contain on average a third GOP, a third Democrats, and a third unaffiliated. And if you're running for office, you have to win unaffiliated to win. Do you buy that or no?
Well, I think what you have to understand when people draw the maps, that's based on party registration, and a lot of people register as unaffiliated who really sort of vote either Republican or Democratic pretty reliably. Likewise, in many places in North Carolina, there are people who are still registered as Democrats, but who, at least at a national level for Congress or for president, vote Republican reliably. And the thing is, now with data and technology, you're able to draw these maps with much greater detail because you don't have to just rely on party registration. You can rely on other sources of information, the same sorts of things that marketers use to know a lot about us, or that political campaigns use to know a lot about us. So we know not only that you're a Republican or a Democrat, but we know what your issues are and how likely you are to turn out in presidential years and midterms. And so it's possible to draw maps that stick a lot more. And that's what you've seen in North Carolina and other states. So North Carolina, it's a 50-50 state at almost every level statewide, yet when it comes to the congressional delegation, Republicans control 10 out of the 13 congressional seats very reliably, something similar in Pennsylvania, where Republicans have 13 out of the 18 congressional seats and have held them in both cycles that are good for Democrats and cycles that are good for Republicans.
Francis, what about that point? Democrats is about 50-50, yet they only get 3 seats. Does that not prove extreme maps, as has been the study says?
Well, first off, we should understand where the Brennan, most of your listeners or viewers don't know who the Brennan Center is. They are an extreme left group that even opposes common sense things like voter ID. So people need to understand that what they did is they took a set of data over several elections and then applied it to make the normal process of partisan gerrymandering look somehow bad. And Mr. Lee uses the term extreme. None of this is extreme. This is something every party, every cycle of redistricting has done to protect incumbents, to protect communities of interest. And what's happened in North Carolina, remember, North Carolina captured, the Republicans captured the legislature 1 seats under a Democratic redistricting. You have seen votes shift. So they have taken the past 3 voting cycles, they ignored the 2010 voting cycle and said, oh, look, something is going on there that's nefarious. And look at this data we have. They came up with a set of data to try and make their case about extreme. And the last thing about North Carolina being 50-50, in some races, yes. But remember, we now have a majority of the Council of State is an elected Republicans. They did not win on a partisan gerrymandering. The majority of our county commissioners, ballots. Right, statewide ballot. Majority of our county commission are Republicans. They are not elected on a gerrymandered district or redistricting. The other thing about it is that Pat McCrory lost the election, but he won 75 counties in North Carolina. the Democrats have a problem with people living in concentrated areas. So therefore, any redistricting you do is going to heighten that sense that those people vote as a block, they live together. Therefore, it's hard to redistrict in a way that spreads them out throughout the state.
Mr. Lee, what about that? You know, I mean, one of the worst districts that North Carolina has seen was actually written by Democrats back in the day. Are you picking on Republicans, I guess, is the question.
Well, you know, let me respond to the geography argument. I won't respond to some of the sort of other innuendo that's sort of been thrown out there, but the geography argument is one that you often hear, which is that Democrats live in cities, and that's why these maps are skewed. But, you know, when you look at the states that have the worst gerrymanders, they're not the most geographically segregated. Yes, there are very heavily Democratic cities, but there's a lot of pink and light blue across maps. States like North Carolina and Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio, these are not places like Wyoming and other states that are actually, frankly, more starkly segregated by partisanship, and yet they don't have that problem, which suggests really that this isn't accidental, that there's something deliberate in this, and that if you sort of carefully slice and dice voters, you can achieve a 10-3 result. And we know that, you know, in the current map that was in fact intended. You know, legislative leaders in North Carolina got up on the floor and said we would have drawn an 11-2 map, but we just couldn't figure out how to do it.
But hasn't partisan gerrymandering been going on since the beginning of time, essentially?
Well, some forms of it have, but you know, it's getting more pernicious in the sense that technology is enabling us to do this much more carefully and to engineer maps that stick at 10-3, or in the case of Pennsylvania at 13 out of 18. From all of the decade. And it used to be you didn't have the sort of data about people that you do now, and you're able to engineer maps that really stick. And that makes the maps very unrepresentative, right? In other words, the framers wanted the legislatures and congressional delegations to be an exact portrait, a miniature of the people as a whole. North Carolina isn't 10-3. You know, it's a vibrant democracy at the statewide level. Sometimes Donald Trump won the state, Roy Cooper won the state. You know, it is a very vibrant and contested democracy at the statewide level, but its legislature and its congressional delegation aren't representative of that, and that's exactly what the framers didn't want.
Francis, we have less than a minute here, but are the losers in this not those independent voters that aren't see themselves as Republicans or Democrats, and they're forced to vote on maps that are either far right or far left?
But they also can vote in primaries. And I think Mr. Lee said the key thing there. He said about the representation. What these groups really want is they want us to have a parliamentary system like Europe, because he talked about representing the number of votes. Well, we are a geographic-based system. We have members of Congress who are based on geography, who are based on geography. So if they really want to go to a not geographical base, then they need to change our Constitution.
Well, good discussion as we have a court hearing on Thursday, at least with the state legislative maps. Mr. Lee, Francis, good to see you, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. That's it for tonight. As always, if it's on Jones Street or Main Street, you'll find it right here on Capitol Tonight. Have a great evening.